Hello to all of the Federalists tuning in to the Fed Club podcast. Today we will have some interesting topics to discuss about. Get ready because here we start with Vanessa. Hello everyone, it's Vanessa. Today we're going to talk about the National Bank and all the controversy that came along with it. So let's begin. The second session of the first Congress was dominated by a conflict over the National Bank. Our hero, the greatest Alexander Hamilton, a Federalist, of course, proposed the creation of the National Bank. He wanted to create it so we could form a strong national government, create an economic growth, and pay off the national debt acquired during the American Revolution War.
The National Bank sounds like such a good idea. Why was there so much conflict surrounding it?
I completely agree with you, Brian. But the big conflict about the National Bank was that the Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, stated that the National Bank was unconstitutional. And Alexander Hamilton, of course, did not agree with that. This created an implied power versus strict interpretation conflict over the National Bank and the Constitution. In a letter, Alexander Hamilton stated that a bank has a natural relation to the power of collecting taxes, to that of regulating trade, to that of providing for the common defense, and that as a bill under consideration contemplates the government in the light of a joint proprietor of the stock of the bank. It brings a case within the provision of the clause of the Constitution which immediately respects the property of the United States. So, in his letter, he's basically explaining how the National Bank is implied within the Constitution. This is when Thomas Jefferson steps in, and in the Gale Encyclopedia, it is stated that Thomas Jefferson, head of Democratic Republicans, they argued that not specifically mentioned in the Constitution could not be exercised. Jefferson regarded the National Bank as a potential monopoly that could infringe upon civil liberties in the United States. So that was the big issue between Thomas Jefferson not wanting the National Bank because it would be an implied, and he only believed in strict interpretation between the Constitution. President George Washington requested a response to their negative views from Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton. After Thomas Jefferson and Attorney General Edmund Randolph gave their opinions on it. The author of the bank plan, Hamilton, prepared a long and masterful reply, which is usually considered the foundation of the broad or literal construction of the Constitution. On February 25, 1791, 2 days after Hamilton delivered his opinion, Washington signed the bill creating the Bank of the United States. So there you go, Federalists. We were granted the National Bank thanks to our wonderful hero, Alexander Hamilton. That's all on the topic of the National Bank. Now, let's move to Hannah.
Thomas Jefferson was a draftsman for the Declaration of Independence. He was also the third president for the United States and was very much responsible for the Louisiana Purchase. Jefferson and James Madison then came together and created their own political party, known as the Democratic Republicans. Their main focus was to reinforce and to give more power to the local government, the expansion of the states' rights, all while protecting the Bill of Rights. As mentioned in the ominative anti-slavery clause to the Declaration of Independence, in his early years, Jefferson thought of Africans to be biologically inferior. Although Jefferson belittled Africans in his early years, he then realized that natural rights should be given to all men. He decided that slavery had a big effect on Africans by labeling them as people who were different than everybody else in a negative way. In commentary on Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, it states that even slaveholders like Thomas Jefferson understood that slavery was a mark upon the new nation, an offense to the egalitarian principles of the Revolution, and a corrupting influence on slaveholders and slaves alike. But slavery was by then an entrenched economic feature of American life, the source of millions of dollars in the human property that would have been wiped off the books had the spirit of liberty held sway. Jefferson had an affair with Sally Hemings, one of his very own slaves, and ended up having 6 children with her. the first of which when she was only 14 years old. Jefferson then continued to own Sally Hemings and her children as slaves and not human beings. He only set 6 children free, but not the rest of his slaves. Once the African American community figured out that they turned away from Jefferson due to his dishonesty and respect for the African Americans in legitimatizing his former claims of not wanting slavery to be in the Declaration of Independence and letting it be till he passed away, it didn't affect him anymore, instead of taking the financial hit for himself and later the country being the Civil War.
Wasn't Hannah's topic just riveting? Okay, and our last topic for today is on the Whiskey Rebellion with me, Brian. My hero, Alexander Hamilton, was the Secretary of State under our main man Washington. Previously, he was a lawyer and politician and had served with Washington during the Revolution. Hamilton was well suited for the job because he was an expert on economy and international trade. America had accumulated many expenses during the Revolution. The federal government was deeply in debt, leaving Hamilton with the responsibility of finding the funds to pay off the enormous bills and provide a financial stability the country needed in order to stay afloat. One of the most attractive potential revenue streams for this purpose was taxation. Big Man Hamilton proposed 2 proposals. One for an increase on tax duties for imported distilled spirits, and one for a new excess tax on those produced domestically to Congress. In a short time, Congress approved both proposals, and with Washington's approval, they became laws. In the excess tax of 1791, it states, for every gallon of those spirits under 5 and not more than 10% below proof. According to the same hydrometer, 10 cents. For every gallon of those spirits of proof and no more than 5% below proof, according to the same hydrometer, 11 cents. The tax was quite simple really. Makers of whiskey would be taxed a certain amount depending on how many gallons they produced. But whiskey makers in the West outright refused to pay the tax, while others were more aggressive in their response to the tax. In this cartoon, created for this cool Federalist newspaper, it shows a rebel who looks like the devil, and it also shows a poor tax collector taking away 2 kegs of rum. In the far left, you can see that the rebels will hang the tax collector. Not only were they hanged, but they're also tarred and feathered. These people were just trying to help our government succeed, but the rebels did not seem to care. They only cared about themselves and their precious whiskey. Washington was left to find a way to resolve this dangerous situation and end the uprising, which became known as the Whiskey Rebellion. After an unsuccessful attempt at achieving a peaceful resolution, our main man Washington had little choice but to take a more forceful approach to stop. Our main man Washington called for the formation of a militia for an engagement with the rebels. He and my hero Hamilton then joined the militia for their march to western Pennsylvania. As the army approached, the rebels diverted the army without a confrontation. What little chickens!
How is the Whiskey Rebellion different from Shays' Rebellion?
Well, Vanessa, Shays' Rebellion happened when the government was governed by the Articles of Confederation, and so the government wasn't able to help out Massachusetts with an army to stop the rebellion like our main man Washington. The tax was supposed to benefit America in the long run, but good-for-nothing whiskey makers changed the way the tax was supposed to be played out and were selfish in doing so. Well, look at the time. Thank you for joining us in today's podcast. Tune in next week to learn about how Federalists are better than everyone else.